Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of my podcast. Today's podcast is called This Is a Way, and as usual, I will begin this podcast with a quote. Suffering becomes beautiful when anyone bears great calamities with cheerfulness, not through insensibility, but through greatness of mind. And this is a quote by Aristotle. So I listen to many podcasts. I subscribe to, I think, about 10 or more, and I add to them every day because it's a great way to increase your knowledge base. It's a great way to, keep your mind busy while you're driving. Instead of just listening to music, you can learn something. Make your car or your vehicle a classroom. A podcast that I was listening to on this particular day is a podcast called Impact Theory by Tom Bilyeu. And on this particular episode, he had a guest by the name of Michael Easter. Now, I never heard of Michael Easter before, but Michael Easter is the author of the book The Comfort Crisis, where he talks about an experience that he had in the Arctic tundra, where he went hunting and he lived there, without the creature comforts that we have on a daily basis as human beings. And even more so, the main focus of that experience, he wasn't just talking about the experience just to talk about what he did, what he went camping with, or who he went camping with, or how he went hunting. But the main focus of what he was talking about is he was discussing how suffering is the key, which is not an uncommon theme. We've talked about that before. We've talked about how in Buddhism there are reference to how suffering is unavoidable and it's a part of life. It's an aspect of our lives. We've talked about David Goggins. He's one of the biggest advocates for suffering I'm familiar with. Before I learned about Michael Easter, it's always been David Goggins. And Michael Easter takes a different approach on suffering. It's more of a scholastic approach, I would almost say. Michael Easter is a teacher. So the way that he builds on suffering and how he comes from different types of sources and just compiles it into one big study or one big foundation or creation that he came up with is really intriguing to me. Now, the podcast was, I think, like 2 hours or more in length. So my podcast is just something to put this information out there so you can look into it, so you can read his book and stuff like that. I'm not going to break down his whole podcast or everything that they were talking about. That's for him to do and that's for them to do. But it was such a great podcast that I wanted to reference it in my podcast so that maybe if you were unaware of the impact theory in this particular episode, you can go out and look for it. Another reference that I have about the constant theme of suffering or having to get it out the mud in my life has been my trial by fire, my personal experiences, going to a military high school, going to a military college, having to leave that college for financial reasons, having to start all over again in community college, just constantly being in a state of having to overcome adversity and having the goal in front of me and striving to achieve that goal, to accomplish that goal. And then the last instance that I want to talk about of how we can be familiar with suffering, or how we've been familiar with suffering and we may or may not have even known it, is the countless people that we look up to in life, like Eric Thomas, Inky Johnson, Benjamin Franklin, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Malcolm X, Maya Angelou, and a host of other people. They've all had some type of suffering or some type of adversity in their lives. And the reason they are where they are today, or where they were if they had passed away, is because they decided to be great despite the adversity. And even though they had to suffer and go through discomfort and experience things that they didn't want to experience, they still did it because their vision, their goal, their quest, their journey, they felt was more noble than just to stop because they felt a little bit of discomfort or a little bit of uneasiness, or they weren't really sure. They still did it despite all of the unsurety and unfamiliarity, and that's what we need to do. We need to still persist, even if we have to go through suffering, because there will be suffering. There's no way to experience life without suffering. It's the flip side of the coin, and we talk about duality, we talk about polarity, balance, yin and yang. Suffering is on the flip side of that coin. and it's your mentality that goes through it that makes the extent or makes the experience, either one that you just had to do, or a horrible experience. Is basically up to you. Perception is reality. The foundation of Michael Easter's argument is, as time has progressed and humans have evolved, we have created a way of life that has handicapped us in many ways. Basically, we've gone away from, everybody having to grow their own stuff. We've gone away from, like, if you need a tool, you make it or you improvise. We've gone away from that. Society has become one of ease, relative ease, compared to our past experience or the past history of the world. If we need something, we can just go to a store 5 minutes away, 10 minutes away, and buy it. If what we need doesn't exist in our community or in the store that we're trying to purchase it at, we could just go to Amazon. We can go online. We can get it that way. Basically, we could shop around the whole world, and that power is at the tip of our fingers. We can go on the computer and we can have access to a world market. And back in the day, things weren't like that. We can even go back to the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the 80s, before computers really got big. Stuff wasn't like that. Life was very, very different. And because of that difference, there was a different set of problems. There was a different focus. That people were different because their environment forced them to be different. It wasn't the comfort level wasn't as high as it is now. It was just different. Times were different. Times change. And they say, as we go along or as we evolve, we become smarter and we create technology and life becomes easier. But in this podcast they say, is life really better though? Has this ease that we've created handicapped us as a society in more ways than one? And they talk about several different ways that this mindset or this comfort level has actually hurt us instead of helped us. He also discusses the phenomenon referred to as prevalence-induced concept change. So bear with me on this one. This is a little definition, but at the end I promise I just make it simple. Prevalence-induced concept change is when instances of a concept become less prevalent. The concept may extend to include instances that it previously excluded, thereby making the magnitude of its own decline. So basically, as the problems that we face diminish, we create more problems. We create new problems. And the study that they were using in the podcast was, they did a study with TSA personnel from the airport, and what they did were they created this slideshow of faces, and they would show these faces to the TSA, and they would tell the TSA agent to judge this face. Like, does this face look like somebody who's dangerous? Does this face look like somebody who's dangerous, or somebody who poses a potential threat? And in that series of that deck of faces, they would have people who looked intimidating, who were meant to look intimidating, and then people who were meant to look not intimidating or had features of just the average Joe. And they did a base study with the normal deck, and then as they went along and the study progressed, they would remove the faces out that were meant to look threatening, and they would either replace them with common everyday people, or they would just leave it with the people that were already there with different, and expose that to different ages. And what they thought would happen in the study is that as the study went on, and as they removed the intimidating faces out of the deck, that the agents would, the occurrence of the agents saying that there were threatening people or faces with threatening characteristics would diminish. But what happened is, the people that they were excluding, in the first round or in the beginning, towards the end, they were including in the assessment that those people would pose a threat. And it was because they had taken out the previous people that were indicated to seem or look as if they pose a threat. And so what they were doing was they were creating their own problems instead of being able to find one or having one readily available to you. You create your own problems. And they were saying this kind of goes back to when we were living really rough. You create your own problems, or you have this like constant state of worry, because that kind of saves your life. If you know that there's the line over there, you can't see the line, but there's a line. Because of past experience, or maybe somebody went over there and got eaten last time y'all went hunting or whatever. You create that database, and then it manifests itself into behaviors, and those behaviors save your life. We do that today, but to a much lesser extent. We still have our base natures, but our base natures have evolved to fit our circumstances, to fit our environments. So even though we're not living in that era or in that part in our history, we still have some of those basic tendencies and those basic behaviors, but they're just meant for a different purpose. They're not meant for the lion always. As the world has become more and more comfortable, we have lost a lot of the aspects of life that make us healthy, both mentally and physically. So some of the things that they mentioned, some of the aspects of life that have become, more comfortable, or have created this area, this level of comfort that we have in society, that he mentions in the podcast, is always having food readily available. Again, this is a lot of this podcast, I'm speaking in reference to the United States of America, because that is the experience that I largely have. These criteria that I'm setting, of these aspects of our society that I'm talking about, do not exist in all society. Some people have it. Excuse me. Some people have it way more difficult than we do. Some people have it, similar to what we have, maybe even better. But this is the only experience that I know. I've read about and learned about other cultures, and kind of know what they go through from a distance, but I haven't experienced it. So this is based largely on the American experience. So some of the things on the list that he was discussing was always having food readily accessible. We could just walk down to the refrigerator. We don't have to go hunting. We don't have to wait in line, at some place where they distribute food. Like, I'm talking other than like soup kitchens and stuff like that, on a mass level. Like, most of us could just go down to the supermarket and we can get food that way. We can go downstairs, get food out the refrigerator. There's no scarcity of food. Food is always available. It's not an issue. And again, this exception does not include the rest of the world, because there are people that I acknowledge do not have food readily accessible. Number 2 is climate control. AC, being able to, if our house is too hot, we could just go to the thermostat. We can turn the temperature down. If it's too cold, we can turn the temperature up. That's a comfort that a lot of people don't have. And largely being in a state of safety and laziness, which has created a sedentary lifestyle that we discussed in our last podcast. Because you don't have to run, because you don't, need to be fit, because you can get by, being the way you are. And I'm not saying anything is wrong with the way you are. I'm just saying, the way that life in America is situated, the way that our current state in history is situated. We don't have to walk miles and miles and miles to hunt down food. We don't have to, fight for our lives on a daily basis. Once we catch our food, we don't have to skin it and process it and cook it and do all of that stuff. Like, all of that stuff is already done for us by other individuals. And because of that, we tend to do jobs different from that. We have a choice. Back in earlier history, you didn't have a choice. You either had to do this or this, but you were still producing, like, for the society, for your community. Now we have office jobs and jobs that don't necessarily cause us to move around. We sit in cubicles, we just answer the phone, we stay hunched over a computer all the time. We don't really get out and walk. And because of that, we're starting to see physical ailments. Mental health is deteriorating. It's a big issue. People are dying from, like, heart attacks and high cholesterol and blood pressure, because even the quality of our food is different. We largely lived off the earth. in previous years. And now we have GMOs, we have all of the type of food that's not natural. It's just other than, and that contributes to our health as well. That's a factor to be included in the whole formula as well. The fact that as a society we tend to not face challenges at a young age, like fights and other forms of adversity, make us shy away from adversity as we get older. As a kid, it used to be kind of normal to get into fights, to get punched in the face, to deal with, the little kid adversities. It was just seen as growing up. And it seems that here currently, that style, that way of life, or that rite of passage kind of is something that we're stepping back away from. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's different. It's a lot different from the experience that I had as a child. I didn't live a rough lifestyle, but I didn't live a completely sheltered lifestyle as well. My mom did a very good job to protect me from all of the bad and harmful aspects of life, but I still experienced life on, I'm not going to say a basic level, but I still experience some things, just typical things that kids experience. I got into fights, I got into arguments, I had to stand up for myself, I had to stand up against bullies, just typical things that, people had to do. Just, it was normal. Like, I don't think that my experience in life was any like traumatic type of experience. It was normal for kids my age, kids at the time, for people to go through what I went through. Like I said, it was almost seen as a rite of passage. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That just is the way it is. But that adversity made me who I am. And as I look back over my life, the times that I felt the most alive was when I was going through some form of adversity. I went to a military high school. It was a boarding school. It was a great experience because it took me away from my parents. I had to live on my own. I had to largely manage my time, my grades. If I wanted to get somewhere, I had to facilitate that. Like, it really ushered me into adulthood. Flight training while I was at RMA. On a daily basis, I had to overcome my fears. If I wanted to be a pilot, I had to get in the plane and I had to go up 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 feet, and I had to do what was prescribed for me to do for the day. I was scared of heights, so at first it was a horrifying experience, but as I got used to it and as I faced my fears on a daily basis, it became easier. And at one point, it was like driving a car. I didn't think nothing of it. So that taught me to face my fears and chase after what I want regardless. Then I went to a military college. It was the Citadel down in South Carolina. Unfortunately, I had to leave because of financial reasons, but that was also an eye-opening experience. That was my first kind of experience into the military and what I was getting myself into, and that made me want it or love it even more. All the steps that I took was to get into the military ultimately as an officer, even though it didn't happen, but ultimately that was my goal. And the Citadel was the first taste of that. It was different. It wasn't like your typical freshman year of college. There was a lot required of me. There was a lot placed on my shoulders. It was an awesome experience. I met awesome individuals, and we had an awesome time. I wish I could have graduated from there, but that wasn't in the cards for me. It is what it is, And then after leaving the Citadel, I went right into Marine Corps boot camp. And then again, Marine Corps boot camp was just an extension of the Citadel. So if I could compare the two experiences, the Citadel was almost like JV football, JV basketball. The Marine Corps boot camp was varsity. Going into the Marine Corps boot camp, the kid gloves were off. At the Citadel, we were training to go to the military and do it for real. Now I'm at Marine Corps boot camp. Everything that we're training for is for real. This is real life scenarios. So we were training to go fight wars, to go accomplish a mission the commander's intent. Again, I would not take that away. Marine Corps boot camp was awesome. I loved it. My leadership was wonderful. The training was intense, and it was exactly what I needed. And a lot of the characteristics that I developed and accomplished, or developed and obtained in boot camp, has helped me to be a better man, I feel, in my adulthood. And a lot of lessons and stuff that I learned from all these periods of time: Marine Corps boot camp, freshman year at the Citadel, flight training, high school. All of that stuff has helped build the foundation of my characteristics, or the foundation and the characteristics of who I am today, presently. And I would like to go back and even develop some of the other things that I felt like I've kind of steered away from and I'm kind of lost. And lastly, one of the major experiences that shaped me was Sapper School. Sapper School is the school I attended in the Marine Corps, and it was 2 weeks of intense training. It was hardcore. It was uncomfortable. It pushed me to a point I hadn't been pushed to in a long time. Marine Corps boot camp pushed me to a point because it was 13 weeks of, constantly just being in an environment other than what I was used to. And, between those 13 weeks and then, maybe the annual trainings that we had in the summertime, it wasn't really intense. It was a consistent level of, man, this sucks, but it wasn't intense. Sapper School was that intensity that I hadn't had in a long time, and it felt good because I hadn't been in that place, I haven't been in that mindset in a long time. But every time I look back, these times of discomfort, these times of being uncomfortable, are the times that I felt the most alive, the times that I felt like I was accomplishing the most, the times that I felt like I was moving closer to my goal and actualizing my full potential and doing what I was meant to do and being who I was meant to be. So accomplishing something difficult sucks for the moment, but in the end is yet another cookie in the cookie jar. And I referred to this cookie jar before. It's David Goggins. He talks about, every time you're in the suck, every time you're in a horrible situation, you need to go back to your cookie jar, pull out a cookie, and remember who you are and what you've done. And that this is just another lap around the track. It's nothing new, because we know that we're gonna face adversity. Adversity is the flip side of the coin. You can't have joy without pain. You can't have sunny days without cloudy days. You can't have day without night. We're gonna experience suffering. And to try to live our life without experiencing suffering is just gonna hurt us more, because through suffering comes growth. Through suffering comes growth. When you become uncomfortable, you grow. You can't wake up and do the same thing in and out of every day and expect to develop or reach a different height or become a new person, or fix the common problems that you have, like in your marriage and your dating life and your family dynamic. You need to do something different. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. So you have to do something different, and that difference is usually suffering, because the human body doesn't like change. We like consistency. We like patterns. We like comfort. We like ease. The mind's job is to keep us alive, so it creates anxiety and worry and stuff like that to keep us from doing new things and to keep us from expanding and stretching out. But in order to accomplish a new level, in order to become a new us, we have to experience suffering. And it's not only physical suffering. It could be staying up late, studying. It could be reading a book after you've already read, countless amounts of information, but you're reading the book for you. You're not reading it for somebody else. It could be physical. It could be doing push-ups. It could be running. It could be doing a ruck. There's different levels. And suffering doesn't always have to be a bad thing. But suffering is just putting yourself in a space and a place of discomfort, of not being at ease with your surroundings and just going to battle with yourself. It's you against yourself. It's not you against anybody else. And once you conquer yourself, once you conquer that internal environment, your external environment will reflect that. Just like David Goggins, just like Eric Thomas, Inky Johnson, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Maya Angelou, all of these people faced adversity and decided that they were going to shape their external environment by doing the work internally that they needed to devote themselves to the cause, to something greater than themselves. So we need to embrace suffering. I'm speaking to myself as well. I've been doing things physically, to get myself to that level. And honestly, I can relate with David Goggins, because when I get on this camera and I'm recording these podcasts, I do feel a level of anxiousness. That's why you kind of see me get tongue twisted and jabberjawed. But I persist through it because, number one, I know I'm not perfect. I mess up, stuff happens, but I know that as time goes on, I'll get better. So the nervousness level that I experienced in the beginning is way less than what I experience now. I'm about 120 something episodes in to my podcast. I feel better because of the experience. And when I don't create podcasts, when I don't create new content, I feel like, I'm not producing, I'm not challenging myself, I'm not getting outside of the monotony of daily life. So thank you for being with me this far. I know I got jabberjawed and I was stuttering and being anxious in the beginning, but we got through it. It's another episode. I'm not gonna edit it, delete it out, or anything like that, because that is me. I read it, and I was stuttering and stammering, and it's all good. I'm okay with that. I'm not perfect. It is what it is. I'm just trying to relay a message. I'm trying to convey an idea, some information that I learned, and hopefully by the end of this podcast, it'll get you thinking, a different way, get you wanting to experience something different, or maybe reignite that fire that you have, deep down, that maybe hasn't been tended to in a long time. So go forth, be great, have a great day.